This is On the Other Hand, a podcast sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas that explores politics and other issues of importance to Arkansans through conversations with community leaders. Stay with us as we talk to another leader in Arkansas who works across differences to get things done and to bring us closer together. Hello and welcome to On the Other Hand. I'm your host, Glenn White, and I'm here with my co-host, April Chatham Carpenter. As you know, on our podcast, April and I interview community leaders in Arkansas who help work towards solutions across various political or other divides, or who in other ways reach across various divisions within our community. So, April, who's our guest today?
Oh, I'm very excited about this guest. We're talking today with Mike Starr. Mike recently wrote a book that I picked up a few weeks ago, and it's entitled Journey into Peace. And the subtitle is A Language for Peace, Progress, and Healing. And I tell you, Glenn, it is chocked full of things that are just really practical tidbits of how we can use our words more effectively to somehow be able to, work with others and have healthy relationships and make wise decisions. And, Mike talks about, well, I'm sure we'll get into this with him, talks about how those words can help us spiral up and prosper, or they can help us spiral down and suffer, or just go round and around going nowhere. He also talks about useless words and dangerous and tyrannical words that limit our ability to make good decisions and have effective responses to others and events around us. Mike is also not just an author, though. He is an avid adventurer, regularly does lots of hiking. You can read about that, some of his book as well. But he's also a seasoned expert problem solver. He managed a successful $100 million a year manufacturing business, and he's a life coach also. And then, very interesting, a former nuclear trained submarine officer. And then some of the journeys that he's climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. He's even canoed 54 days from Pittsburgh to New Orleans at one point in his life. And, now he lives in Arkansas. So, hey, we get to have him on our show today. So welcome to On the Other Hand, Mike.
Thank you, April. It's an honor to be here.
Well, I would like to start out by just having you tell us a bit about yourself, brief bio, how it led you to your current beliefs about the power of language.
Well, the title of the book is called Journey into Peace, and I would just say this began about 25 years ago. So I'll give you just the last third of my life anyhow, because I'm 73. About 25 years ago, I was standing on my front porch in Houston in a little town called Tomball. It was nighttime. The crickets were chirping. It was real humid, as it often gets in the Houston area. And there was a police car with the lights flashing. There was an ambulance with all the lights flashing, and they were taking one of my family members out of the house in a stretcher. In parallel with that time, I was also working a fairly demanding job, but I was working for what I would consider to be a tyrant, a very, I would say not empathetic person would be an understatement, and very demanding, very demeaning. He eventually was escorted off company property about a year or two later, when it really came to light of how treacherous his behavior was. So between my personal chaos that was going on family life and my work chaos, I came to see that I'm not alone in a lot of suffering and conflict that goes on, that a lot of people are suffering and in conflict, and there's got to be a way to minimize or at least mitigate that, so that we'd have more joy, more health, and more harmony. And so then that's how it began. And I kept looking like, what's the way? How do we go about getting to that point in time? And through that whole journey, I became an active member of Al-Anon, which is a support group for family of alcoholics. I became an active member of NAMI, which is a National Alliance for Mental Illness. I've got involved in things like Landmark Education, which is a remarkable organization in terms of improving our thinking and perceptions, as well as in my professional life, learning about how to manage, how to delegate, learning how to reduce waste, lean management practices, quality circles. And eventually some of the adventures like climbing Mount Kilimanjaro. So that was kind of a bit of the journey. And the surprising thing I found was, first of all, the thing that was not surprising is that we ourselves are our greatest allies and our greatest enemies. The thing that I found surprising, that in kind of a linguistic viewpoint, that the very everyday language that we use has embedded in self-fulfilling prophecies, words that can really assist us with making progress or going backwards, words that can be used to heal or hurt, words that could be used to help us succeed or fail, be at peace or be anxious. And that was a kind of a shocking kind of realization. And so for the last 10 years, I've tried to refine and define that better. And that's the time I spent writing this book, which just recently got published in December.
You've already kind of given us some teasers about a little bit about your book and your approach by telling us some background about that. I'm curious, before we get into more about those key takeaways, what brought you to Arkansas?
My job, I was transferred from Houston, Texas to Little Rock, Arkansas.
Okay, so you've been living here for a bit then.
Since the year 2000, going on 24 years.
All right, well, you're truly an Arkansan then. Well, are there a couple of takeaways from your book to get us started that you'd like for people to know about your approach as we get into the interview today?
That's a great question. I think sometimes it's incumbent upon us to take the time to distill our thoughts and come up with a few key takeaways and not immerse people in a lot of information. I would say one big takeaway is that if we improve our language, and I like the word improve, I don't like the word change, and I can explain that later. If we improve our language by discerning wise, empowering language, discerning dangerous language, discerning useless language, and using the states of being that I talk about in the book, we improve our thinking. Because we use language for thinking and communicating. We improve our thinking, we improve our communications. And in the end, we improve our perception of reality and make better decisions in response to the reality around us. And that would be like the huge takeaway. And maybe as a subset of that, I came up with a philosophy called betterism, where our focus is on improving, seeking win-win, focusing on the fact that the goal is a journey plus the destination. Too often people get fixated on a destination and they sacrifice health, relationships, and real quality of existence in their pursuit of a destination. I say we need both. We need a healthy journey and a meaningful destination. And I guess lastly, I would add the concept of NEWT. It's an acronym I've kind of coined called the natural order of things. And my contention is, if we understand why someone became who they became, if we delve into their socioeconomic background, their gender, their birth order, their geographic era, their time era, if we look at all those things, the religions they were introduced to and not introduced to, we come to a point where we understand exactly why they are as they are. We may not agree with it, but we're like at peace with, yeah, I could see, but for the, grace of God, there go I would be that. So NEWT is such a powerful place because it diffuses anger, diffuses demonizing and denigrating, and puts us in a place of, I can get it, why that person is the way they are, whether it be Mother Teresa or Genghis Khan. We understand why they became what they became. And then that leads to the last very important concept, which I call the EBC symbiotic three, is we begin with empathy, we create meaningful and focused boundaries, and we have dispassionate consequences. So we make peace with the world around us. There's no need to fight it like the Borg in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Resistance is futile when it comes to reality. And then we just set boundaries, and we become, I call the umbrella opener. Just like if it's raining, we just open the umbrella. We don't get angry. We don't shake our fist at the sky. We just open the umbrella and move on. And in this case, when our boundaries are encroached upon or crossed, we just put our boundaries into place. And it's not about what they do, it's about how we respond. A lot of people think boundaries is we tell somebody and they obey. That's not an effective approach. We have to ahead of time decide, how am I going to respond in a particular type of situation, and be absolutely committed to that. So a lot of takeaways, I guess.
Well, hopefully we'll hit on several of those as we move forward in this interview.
And, actually several of the things you've already talked about and some of the things that I understand about what you're saying in your book, we thought apply really well to, our goal and our mission in this podcast to better understand and help people understand how they can move across divides and deal with people who have differences. So one of the things we often do with our guests early on is we just ask them about their political leanings, and we use color to, rather than say a party or an ideology, just say, if you're kind of in the conservative, Republican, or whatever direction, it would be kind of in the red direction. If you're liberal, Democratic, progressive, whatever, that'd be more blue, purple, kind of some combination in between. All sorts of creative color choices we've heard so far. I wonder where you might place yourself in that political color spectrum.
Thank you for asking. And first of all, I want to thank you, Glenn and April, for what you're doing. I mean, we're approaching the same issue in different ways, which is to try to find common ground, to have civil discourse, and to show that there's so much we have in common in this sort of era of, I call it contra identities, and define ourselves in opposition to others and demeaning and demonizing others. I don't want to sidestep the issue, but I would say my colors are red, white, and blue. I'm a modern conservative in my views of self-reliance, minimal government, the importance of merit, and how to solve problems effectively. I'm an old-fashioned liberal when it comes to things like diversity and the need to include different ethnicities, different socioeconomic groups, and at times having to give them a boost up because they got started with a disadvantage. And I think for being an old-fashioned liberal is more focused on compassion and understanding of why people are the way they are, and it's not just as simple as pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and teamwork. The white part of it is, I think I've come to the point in life where I'm like the snows of Kilimanjaro that Hemingway wrote about. I'm cool, and I'm in a lot of ways dispassionate in a way that I'm not angry. I'm not PO'd. I'm not judgmental. I'm more, empathy is like a huge word for me these days, empathetic and understanding. I understand why people went the way they did, and I'm kind of matter of fact about, here's some thoughts and ideas. So I guess from those values and viewpoints and directions, those are my colors, red, white, and blue: modern conservative, old-fashioned liberal, and just a cool, dispassionate person seeing reality for what it is. Because when you see things clearly, you can avoid walking over cliffs or beating your head up against a wall.
Always a good strategy. Yeah. So you may have touched on this just a tad bit, but I always like to find out from people where their values came from, where their political views. What were the early values that you learned growing up? What are some life experiences you had? What are the major influences in your life that led to the development of your red, white, and blue political beliefs?
Well, I certainly my values were grounded in my parenting. My dad was a factory worker whose identity was much more immersed in Ukrainian community, his church involvement with the Eastern Orthodox Church, and being part of I guess, the guiding council at that church. Um, he went to work, showed up on time, did his job well, I'm sure, but who he really was this community leader who believed in a lot of the history of Ukrainians and the value of seeing a free Ukraine, which eventually they became free, and that leads to a whole other discussion. With my mom saw a lot of things that I was able to see through her eyes. I saw the woman hanging in the town square with her chest cut open and the baby stuffed inside. I saw the uncle hanging from a tree with his tongue cut out. I saw being on a cattle car and being stopped on the side of the train tracks and stripped naked and sprayed with oil to delouse them. I saw my mother in a Nazi factory camp. I saw my mother avoiding persecution by the communists after uh, Stalin and Hitler agreed to the partitioning of parts of Europe and Poland. And when she came eventually to the United States, she had this amazing level of gratitude for some of the most simple things that a lot of us take for granted, such as freedom of speech. My mother grew up at a time where people would wake up in the morning and say, "Where's our neighbor Ivan?" Don't ask. Ivan was whisked away, taken to Siberia, or sometimes they found buried in a garden outside the town. You were afraid you couldn't speak what was on your mind, what was on your heart, what was on your concern. The consequences were dire. Freedom of religion, that you could worship as you saw fit or not. And she had a great gratitude for these really basic values that she saw when she came to the United States. And she had been wandering through Europe, ended up in Germany in the Nazi work camp. My dad landed on Normandy Beach on D-Day as a medic, and then traveled with the army through the Battle of Bulge. And eventually, by that time, the Nazis had surrendered, and he met up with my mother and was an interpreter for the Ukrainians and convinced them, the Allies, not to send that group of Ukrainians back to Ukraine, which was the Soviet Union, because that was there was a lot of, I guess, harshness towards Ukrainians that go back to 1933 and the kulaks and Stalin and the 5 to 7 million Ukrainians that were starved to death. So going back to a Soviet country was the last thing they wanted to do. So my values were really about, gratitude, appreciation for basic things. My dad had lost work for a while, and he would take me where he'd go plaster ceilings in homes. So it was the era of it's up to me. There was little entitlement. There was a little given to you. Basically, you had to find what was important to you. So I think that's kind of what I grew up with. And even though I saw that as a young person, our home was very near the poverty level, actually, but I always thought I was fine because I was loved. We had food and we had a roof over our head, and I grew up in an atmosphere where there wasn't really jealousy or demeaning or degradation of anybody. It was just, if anything, it was just about being, I guess, prideful of the Ukrainian heritage and culture.
Okay. I'd like to clarify something, make sure I'm understanding right. So as I understand it, it was your everything you heard and experienced and observed from your parents was a big influence. And in your mother in particular, if I understand that right, you're saying she shared with you a lot of horrific stories about what happened um, for them. Did any of those really difficult experiences, were those things that you encountered personally, or it's more from hearing the stories from your mom or your parents?
Those were just basically hearing it from my mom and being able to see it through her eyes. I mean, I had lessons to learn, my journey ahead of me, but that was the foundation. And another thing I didn't mention, I think, with particularly with both my parents, because my dad's father had died during the great influenza epidemic in the early 1900s. He had four sisters. Actually, one was on the way, and they lived in I think it was about a 600 square foot uh, duplex. And he had to quit school at like eighth grade to help support the family. I think what was imbued within me was resilience and self-reliance. If it's to be, it's up to me. And I saw how my mother had survived some really, challenging times, and my dad had to live through, I mean, there one time that my dad said they were thinking of splitting up the family because his mother couldn't afford to raise the kids, and she actually brought in boarders. If you could imagine a mother with four children bringing in boarders into a 600 square foot home to help make ends meet. Yeah, I think resilience and belief in that we'll find a way. It was always there with me. Even when I told my mother, say, "Hey, Mom, I'm thinking of canoeing from Pittsburgh to New Orleans." My dad was like, "You're crazy," and my mother's like, "Well, that sounds like fun. When do you think you'll try it?" And I says, "Okay," and she believed in me, and and she loved me. I mean, to a fault. She so loved me, and I see so many people, even within my own close family group, who never felt that love, and so it's like a black hole that could never be filled. They spend a whole lifetime trying to fill it with something, looking for love in all the wrong places, I guess. But if there was one thing, I guess I would say I was loved and I felt loved.
That's an important ingredient in resilience for anyone. That's certainly been established for a long time. Your story helps me better understand something that you state in your book, that as the son of Ukrainian parents, you were standing on their shoulders, and that this led you to develop an unshakable view of gratitude, empowerment, and human frailty. So I think you've given us some ideas there. Is there anything else you would want to expand upon to elaborate upon that quote?
I guess the only thing I would add for myself is to say that I was aware from a very early age that there's so many other people who are helping me make progress, and that not only am I not alone, but that I cannot do it alone.
That makes sense. Well, as you've been talking, I keep thinking back to that acronym NEWT that you were talking about, and I'm like, I can see the kind of path of some of the experiences that you had leading you into being red, white, and blue. I mean, some of the different aspects of what you already shared. And I think about, I'm sure you've had other experiences as well that you've had the opportunity to work with people who are different than you. And because your book clearly, the thesis of your book clearly fits well with a desire to talk with and highlight, people who are doing the hard work of increasing civility and problem solving with others, which is consistent with our podcast, as Glenn mentioned earlier. So I'm curious about how in work settings, in community settings, in service settings, how you have been able to demonstrate this respect for and willingness to work with others, despite differences you may have with them. I'm only guessing the military gave you an opportunity to do that, but probably there are other settings as well.
Yes, if I may, I'd like to share a story that reflects that for me. I think having heroes is a good thing. and heroes are human. They're not perfect, but I think we're at a time where there are not enough heroes. One of my heroes is an R&B musician by the name of Daryl Davis. He's a black R&B musician, um, and played with Tommy Lee Jones and a whole bunch of other folks. And he experienced racism in the northeastern part of the United States. He was a little young Boy Scout walking in the parade, and people were throwing things at him because he was carrying the flag, and he was the only black um, boy or child in the parade. And he came home and asked his parents and what that was all about, and they began to explain a little bit to them how people act, how they do in that manner. And he had this pressing question. I had the question of how can we reduce conflict and suffering and create harmony. His question was, how can someone hate me who doesn't even know me? How does that happen? And so he was like on this quest as well. And at one point in time, while he's playing in the bar, he's between sets, and this fella buys him a drink and tells him what a great player he was, a great musician. And he gets to realize and this fella tells him he's a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And he's like, yeah, you're kidding. He says, no, I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And he gets to talking, and this fella would come back at another time, and they got to be having a cordial conversation. And Daryl decided he wanted to know more about the KKK. So he asked him, like, who's like the top guy you know in the KKK? And he says, oh, it's this guy named Roger Kelly. It was in Maryland. He's the Grand Dragon in Maryland. And he goes, give me a contact number for him. So he did. He says, just don't tell him I gave it to you. So Daryl sets up a meet in a motel with this Grand Dragon, Roger Kelly, and he had I guess, an administrative person that helped him with his band and all that in the room with him. Long story short, here comes in Roger Kelly with his bodyguard with a gun, and they come in and they see this black man, and they're like he's ready to pull out his pistol. And it was a tense moment, and they got through it. And over time, Roger Kelly and Daryl Davis became friends. Imagine. And he would invite Daryl Davis to the KKK rallies, the burning the cross and all that kind of stuff. And Daryl would be there, and he would talk with but other KKK members. Daryl treated them with respect. He did not respect their ideology, but he respected as a human being. And so in parallel with me is when I am interacting with people, I try to invoke what I call relationship listening. Try to learn from them, learn about them, maybe learn about me, learn about the world. And Daryl made it a real, I guess, mission to understand where these folks were coming from. Why did they feel the way they did? And I think he came to the conclusion partly it was fear, and partly it was taught. And not to get too political, but a lot of the hatred that goes on in the Middle East, like with Hamas, that is taught. That's not a result of Israeli actions. That is taught hatred to these young children, and they brainwash them. So the end of the story is this. I believe close to 200 KKK members eventually disavowed their association with the KKK, including Roger Kelly, who had been advanced to the Imperial Wizard, which was a pretty high level in the KKK. I don't understand their ranking and all that stuff. And Roger gave Daryl Davis his KKK robe. And if you watch some of Daryl Davis's TED Talks and TEDx talks, he actually takes out the robe and shares it. And so I think I believe what I attempt to do is listen to people respectfully. Respectful listening, relationship listening can be very healing in terms of, hey, I hear what you have to say. I understand there's a reason why you feel that way you do. I acknowledge your reasons for feeling that way. and being kind and respectful to them, even though we may not agree with them. And I practice that with the checkout person at Walmart or Office Depot, or my clients in executive coaching services, or my neighbors, or people I run into when I'm hiking and camping. One person at a time, I try to spread the belief, or at least exemplify or set the example that I love you. I care about you. You're important. Maybe we disagree totally on different things, but kind of still care about you. And I'm often saying to people, hey, I love you, man. I love you. Because I have this overwhelming compassion and love for humanity.
How did you get that, Mike? I mean, part of it's how you were raised, right? But this overwhelming compassion and love for humanity.
Well, I would say one thing is, and to be, totally, I guess, revealing is, I was raised a Christian. I am not a practicing Christian at this stage game, but I have a lot of respect for the fundamental tenets of Christianity. And one of the things that did strike me at a very early age is the statement in the Bible that says Christ was on the cross and he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." For they know not what they do. That stuck with me from an early age. And that's empathy. That's compassion. I have a chapter in my book that says forget forgiveness, that forgiveness is a useless word. It's not a verb of action. And I say go for self-exorcism, which that's a whole other discussion. But understanding that people can't help being who they are, you understand why the lynch mobs are lynch mobs. You understand why the mob chose Christ to be crucified over, I guess it was Barabbas, or who was the other choice. You understand why the KKK member came to be a racist. You understand why Hamas did and do what they do. I think by putting ourselves in that place, we are leveraging our potential to listen and maybe eventually have some degree of influence with people to help them find passion and compassion for others and themselves, especially beginning with themselves. So I don't know, but I think maybe it's a whole stew of how it came to be. I'm not sure if there was any one ingredient, but I do think that that one statement in the Bible was remarkable for me and changing my perspective and having compassion.
It's a beautiful thing to aim for sure.
As a retired psychologist, having spent my career doing a lot of work in therapy, I'm real familiar with some of the stuff we do. There's extensive research and clinical experience for decades that talks about the importance of the language we use, not only with other people, but with ourselves and in our inner thoughts, and how that influences our own psychological health and that of our relationships. So I was wondering, to what extent, if any, do you think you were influenced by or exposed to those thoughts or ways that your model might be different from, let's say, cognitive behavioral therapy is the classic example, or maybe just, something that it contributes that's different than what you may have heard about in some of these psychological approaches?
I think what's unique about my perspective in my book, Journey into Peace, A Language for Peace, Progress, and Healing, is the recognition and the ability to discern that our current language is inadequate and is sometimes dangerous. Whether it be Jung or Freud or Rogers or Aaron Beck with cognitive therapy, or the things that came up with motivational interviewing with Miller and Rolnick, and even with one of my other heroes, which is Javier Amador, in his book, I Am Not Sick, I Don't Need Help, and his LEAP process, which begins with the L word, listening, and the E word, empathy. But all of them and all of that tends to use the current language. And our current language is deficient and inadequate. There was a time when there was no word like sharing or responsible. I mean, these words all evolved over time. And if you're in a scientific community like chemistry, they evolved, and built on each other, like the periodic table. You learned about atoms, you learned about electrons, you learned about the valences and all those things. And so they're a very logical construct, but our everyday language is not. It's become, well, it has been haphazard, and to a certain degree, it's weaponized to create division, confusion. I actually believe we're on the early stages of a mental health crisis in the next decade or two because of the confusion that young people are facing about what used to be defined as, the absolutes of right and wrong and good and bad. So I've done three things. I said there's wise, empowering language. Use these kind of words. They're helpful. They will help advance your thinking and improve your relationships. Then there's useless words like forgiveness. Forgiveness is a not activity. You can use it as a noun, as a place to go to. You start A, I harbor animosity. I want to get to a place where B, I no longer harbor animosity. Forgiveness is a useless way to go. And it's in some ways, it kind of puts us on a pedestal of looking down at people as well. And so I say, if you want to go for no longer harboring animosity to no longer harboring it, you have to go through the route of empathy and understand why people are the way they are. And then there's nothing to forgive. Then it's just going back to the empathy, boundaries, and consequences. So like, I believe I could help somebody get through some anger and frustration and hatred that they've had for decades in a matter of months by using that process. And then lastly, it's the dangerous and tyrannical words. And some of the words that I define as dangerous, you might find, well, that's kind of weird, like change. I think when we talk about people and improvement, I think change is dangerous because what it does is it opens up to the fact that, oh, look, he did that, he never changed, or she did that, she never changed, or I did that, I didn't change. No, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for progress, not perfection, looking for incremental improvement. So I like the word improve. I think change is a dangerous word. I think unfriendly is a dangerous word too. We do have a rescue dog, Rippy, who's a Chihuahua. And after a couple of weeks, I told my wife, I said, it's the most unfriendly dog I ever had. And after another week of thinking about that, I said, wait a minute, Mike, language. The dog's a rescue dog. The dog's a Chihuahua. It probably has the small person syndrome, and it may be baked in the DNA and may be abused. So now, and from that day forward, I looked at Rippy as being fearful and insecure. So as long as I can keep that in my mind, that Rippy is fearful and insecure, I approach Rippy calmly, slowly, and with a gentle voice. I'm not demeaning Rippy. I'm not like, getting mad at the turtle because it can't climb the tree. I get it. That's just part of who Rippy is. And so I come up with new words like newt, the natural order of things, lear, which is a legitimate, empowering alternate reality. I have words like Duran-free, like how do you measure progress? Through the duration, intensity, and frequency. Don't look at it in absolute. Is the duration moving in the right direction? Is the intensity going in the right direction? Is the frequency going in the right direction? So I think what's different is I actually have created a new language that discounts certain words, that has you notice certain words. I call Be the Bloodhound, notice them and don't evolve them, and then gives them words that you can build on, because you can't make advances in chemistry if you don't understand electrons and protons and the nucleus and valences. You're not. And so as you understand that with a new language and a new, view of things, you could make substantial progress. But I think in the other areas, which, I don't claim to be in competition with Freud or Beck, but they're using the current language, and that language is really at the heart of the problem.
Well, Glenn, that's it for the first part of our conversation with Mike. Goodness, we've heard a lot about improving our language to improve our thinking and communication and our perceptions of reality, and needing heroes, treating others with respect. And that doesn't always mean that we respect people's ideologies, and doing this one person at a time. Just lots of good nuggets in that first episode. Be sure to check out the second part of the conversation with Mike, as well as other podcast episodes of On the Other Hand. You can find us on the podcast page of the Braver Angels Arkansas website, and the address for that is arkansas.braverangels.org, or you can find us on many popular podcast sites.
When you visit our website, remember that we have links to all our episodes, and you also have a link to email us for program feedback or suggested speakers. That email address is otherhandar@gmail.com. One previous interview that I think our listeners might be interested in hearing from is a local member here in Central Arkansas of the Baha'i faith who had some really fascinating things to talk with us about. His name is Daniel Reimer, and that conversation is found in episodes 10 and 11.
On the Other Hand is sponsored by Braver Angels in Arkansas. Music was composed by Randall Standridge of Jonesboro, Arkansas, and was performed by the University of Northern Colorado Symphonic Band, Dr. Richard Main, conductor.
From your host, Glenn White,
and April Chatham Carpenter,
let's each do our part to bring our community closer together.